Director Comey, I want to begin by attempting to put to rest several claims made by the President about his predecessor, namely that President Obama wiretapped his phones. So that we can be precise, I want to refer you to exactly what the President said and ask you whether there is any truth to it. First, the President claimed, quote, "Terrible. Just found out that Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower just before the victory. Nothing found. This is McCarthyism," unquote. Director Comey, was the President's statement that Obama had his wires tapped in Trump Tower a true statement?
With respect to the President's tweets about alleged wiretapping directed at him by the prior administration, I have no information that supports those tweets, and we have looked carefully inside the FBI. The Department of Justice has asked me to share with you that the answer is the same for the Department of Justice and all its components. The Department has no information that supports those tweets.
The President accused Mr. Obama and presumably the FBI of engaging in McCarthyism. As you understand the term McCarthyism, do you think President Obama or the FBI was engaged in such conduct?
I'm not going to try and characterize the tweets themselves. All I can tell you is we have no information that supports them.
Were you engaged in McCarthyism, Director Comey?
Try very hard not to engage in any isms of any kind, including McCarthyism.
The President second stated, quote, "Is it legal for a sitting president to be wiretapping a race for president prior to an election? Turned down by a court earlier, a new low," unquote. Director Comey, can you answer the President's question? Would it be legal for President Obama to have ordered a wiretap of Donald Trump?
I'm not going to characterize or respond to the tweets themselves. I can tell you in general, as Admiral Rogers and I were just saying, there is a statutory framework in the United States under which courts grant permission for electronic surveillance, either in a criminal case or a national security case, based on a showing of probable cause, carefully overseen. It's a rigorous, rigorous process that involves all three branches of government, and it's one we've lived with since the late 1970s. That's how it works. So no individual in the United States can direct electronic surveillance of anyone. It has to go through an application process, ask a judge. The judge can then make the order.
So President Obama could not unilaterally order a wiretap of anyone?
No president could.
But there is evidence, is there not, of a break-in of the Democratic headquarters by a foreign power using cyber means?
Yes, there was. As the intelligence community report, the unclassed report said in January, the Russian intelligence services hacked into a number of enterprises in the United States, including the Democratic National Committee.
And there was an effort by the Russians to cover up their break-in of the Democratic Party headquarters by using cutouts like WikiLeaks to publish the stolen material. Isn't that right?
Certainly to cover up that they were the ones releasing it.
Director Rogers, in an effort to explain why there was no evidence supporting the President's claim that Obama had wiretapped him, the President and his spokesman, Sean Spicer, have suggested that British intelligence, through its NSA or GCHQ, wiretapped Mr. Trump on President Obama's behalf. Did you ever request that your counterparts in GCHQ should wiretap Mr. Trump on behalf of President Obama?
No, sir, nor would I. That would be expressly against the construct of the Five Eyes agreement that's been in place for decades.
And the Five Eyes are some of our closest intelligence partners, and Britain is one of them.
Yes, sir.
Have you seen any evidence that anyone else in the Obama administration made such a request?
No, sir, and again, my view is the same as Director Comey. I've seen nothing on the NSA side that we engaged in any such activity, nor that anyone ever asked us to engage in such activity.
And if you were to ask the British to spy on America, that would be a violation of U.S. law, would it not?
Yes, sir.
Our relationship with British intelligence is one of the closest we have with any foreign services. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, our British allies have called the President's suggestion that they wiretapped him for Obama nonsense and utterly ridiculous. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
Does it do damage to our relationship with one of our closest intelligence partners for the President to make a baseless claim that the British participated in a conspiracy against him?
I think it clearly frustrates a key ally of ours.
Certainly wouldn't endear the British intelligence services to continue working with us, would it?
I believe that the relationship is strong enough. This is something we'll be able to deal with.
But it's not helpful, you
Yes,
would
sir.
agree. Director Rogers, President Trump recently met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. During a joint press conference, the president suggested that they both had something in common, that they had both been wiretapped by President Obama. Director Comey has just demonstrated why the claims by the president about his being wiretapped by Obama were unsupported by any evidence. But the claim he made about wiretapping directed at Merkel referred to something that came up in the context of the Snowden disclosures. I'm not going to ask you to comment on whether the chancellor was the subject of any eavesdropping, but I would like to ask you whether the Snowden disclosures did damage to our relationship with our German ally, and whether the chancellor herself expressed her concern at the time.
Yes, sir.
In light of this, is it helpful to our relationship with the chancellor or our relationship with German intelligence to bring this up again in a public forum?
It certainly complicates things, but again, I'd like to think that our relationship is such we're going to be able to deal and keep moving forward.
So our relationships with the British and the Germans, you hope, are strong enough to withstand any damage done by these comments?
By anything in general, sir. We have foundational interests with each other. We need to keep working together.
This time, Director Comey, let me ask you a few questions you may or may not be able to answer. Do you know who Roger Stone is?
Generally, yes.
Are you aware that he was a partner of Paul Manafort?
You know, Mr. Schiff, I'm worried we're going to a place I don't want to go, which is commenting on any particular person, and so I don't think I should comment. I'm aware of public accounts, but I don't want to talk more than that.
Are you aware that he has publicly acknowledged having directly communicated with Gustav II, someone that the intelligence community has assessed was a persona of Russian intelligence?
I've read media accounts to that effect. I don't want to hurt anybody's feeling in the media. I don't know whether that's accurate or not.
If Mr. Stone acknowledged that Mr. Podesta's time in the barrel was coming in August of 2016, would that have been prior to the public release of stolen emails of Mr. Podesta's?
I believe that's correct chronology.
Do you know how Mr. Stone would have known that Mr. Podesta's emails were going to be released?
It's not something I can comment on.
Do you know that Mr. Podesta has said that at the time he was not even aware of whether his emails had been stolen and would be published?
It's not something I can comment on.
Does the president still have complete confidence in FBI Director Comey?
There's no reason to believe he doesn't at this time. John?
He said, wait, no, he said that there is no information to support the allegations that the president made against President Obama.
At this time.
So is the president prepared to withdraw that accusation and apologize to the
No,
president?
we started a hearing. It's still ongoing. And then, as Chairman Nunes mentioned, this is one in a series of hearings that will be happening. I think there's, as I noted last week, there's also a lot of interesting news coming out of that in terms of the activities that have gone on to reveal the information on American citizens that have been part of this, particularly General Flynn. There's a lot of things that aren't being covered in this hearing that I think are interesting. That you know, since it's ongoing, I'll leave that for now. But I think there's a lot of areas that still need to be covered. There's a lot of information that still needs to be discussed.
The director also said he's investigating the links and the possibility of coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Given that the president just this morning said that the Democrats made up the Russia story, why would the FBI director be investigating a story if it's simply...
I don't think that's what he
something-
said, but again, look at what...
No, he did. He said that he's investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether or not there was any coordination.
Correct. But again, investigating it and having proof of it are two different things. You look at the acting Obama CIA director said that there's smoke but there's no fire, Senator Tom Cotton. Not that I'm seen and not that I'm aware of. You look at Director Clapper, not to my knowledge. Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware. I have no evidence of collusion. I mean, there's a point at which you continue to search for something that everybody who's been briefed hasn't seen or found. I think it's fine to look into it, But at the end of the day, they're going to come to the same conclusion that everybody else has had. So you can continue to look for something, but continuing to look for something that doesn't exist doesn't matter. There is a discussion, I heard some names floated around before, that were hangers-on on the campaign. And I think at some point, people that, got thrown around at the beginning of this hearing, some of those names, the greatest amount of interaction that they've had is had cease and desist letters sent to them. So
the Roger Stones and the Carter
no,
Pages,
yeah,
are you-
exactly. The Carter Pages, yes. But I mean, those people, the greatest amount of interaction that they had with the campaign was the campaign apparently sending them a series of cease and desist letters. So again, I think that when you read a lot of this activity about associates, there is a fine line between people who want to be part of something that they never had an official role in, and people who actually played a role in either the campaign or the transition. Julie.
I just have two quick questions on the hearing today. Does the president, now that we know that there is an ongoing investigation by the FBI, does the president stand by his comments that he's not aware of any contacts that his campaign associates had with Russia during the election?
Yes.
Okay, and then the second one is, has anyone from the White House?
Well, can I just amend the first?
Sure.
Obviously, just to be clear, I know that I'm trying to think through this for a second because obviously General Flynn.
Right.
But again,
During the campaign,
right, and
before the election.
and I'm not aware of any at this time. But even General Flynn was a volunteer of the campaign. And then obviously there's been this discussion of Paul Manafort, who played a very limited role for a very limited amount of time. But beyond,
But are you
hey, Jonathan, hold on. Can you stop interrupting other people's questions? Okay, Jonathan, somebody's asking a question. It's not your press briefing. Julie's asking a question. Please calm down.
Just to
Julie.
clarify that, are you saying then that the president is aware of contacts that Manafort?
No,
had?
nothing that hasn't been previously discussed. I just don't want to make it look like we're not aware of the stuff that's
Understood. And then the second thing is, anyone from the White House up to the president been interviewed by the FBI as part of this investigation?
not that I'm aware of. Mara.
You said that, you made a point of saying that Comey refused to say whether he had briefed Obama about the investigation, and also the president on his official account tweeted the same thing today. Comey made a point today of saying, please do not draw any conclusions from my ability to confirm or deny anything, but you are drawing a conclusion from that. So
I
what
think
is the
we're
conclusion you're
pointing it
drawing?
out. I mean, we're making a point that it is not known, and I think there's further. I mean, to everyone who was looking for a conclusion today, I think there's a lot more that needs to be discussed and looked at before we can jump to a conclusion about. Hold on, but I think the point is that in the same token, you've got individuals that want an answer. And at the same time, there's clearly a lot of information that still hasn't come out or been discussed.
So you're looking forward to this investigation?
I think that there is a lot more to come, is the answer that I.
The reason that I'm asking this question is you said that they are going to come to the same conclusion of everybody else.
My point is that.
So you already know what the conclusion
No.
is.
What I'm getting at is that there is this media narrative that continues to talk about collusion that exists, and yet every person that's been briefed, Nunes, Tom Cotton, Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, Clapper, the Obama appointee, have all said that nothing that they've seen makes them believe that there was any collusion. And I think there's a difference between talking about an investigation into the 2016 election, which we all know, and any evidence of collusion. There is no evidence, according to the people that have been briefed, of any collusion or activity that leads them to believe that exists. I think that is an important point that gets overlooked over and over and over again.
You said it's fine to look into it, but they are going to come to the same conclusion of everybody else, that this collusion doesn't exist. So you already know.
No, I don't.
When
What I'm
investigation's finished,
no,
that's-
no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that every single person, because what the director said today is that there's an ongoing investigation. My point is to say that everybody who's been briefed on that investigation, there's an assumption that because there's an investigation, it must mean that it's about something. My point to you is that there's an assumption on behalf of most people in the media about what that investigation must mean. And my point to you is that despite the narrative that gets played over and over again with respect to what the investigation might mean in terms of collusion, every person, Republican and Democrat, that's been briefed on it has come to the same conclusion that there is no collusion and that that's over. So while we can talk about an investigation big picture holistically, the idea that so many people are trying to jump to a conclusion seems very, very misguided.
You said in the case of the president's tweets that there's an ongoing investigation. then more things will come out that may justify that. But in the case of the collusion charge, you listed all the people who said there's been no investigation there. Why, in one case, is that sufficient to say that there is no, you can rule out collusion now, versus in the other case you say, oh, there's going to be more information coming out that will prove
Well, I'm
these
not,
tweets
because again, I think there's a difference. I'm not ruling anything out. I'm merely explaining to you that every person, Republican, Democrat, Obama, that served in the Obama administration, across a broad section,
tweets
in terms of what?
that they're.
But I think that there's on the investigation itself, we know from the people who have been briefed. On the other piece of it, we know that it's an ongoing thing, and that even according to the Department of Justice, in terms of the information that's been provided, and Chairman Nunes, that they are still at the beginning of this process. That is a very different thing than a group of people saying there is an ongoing investigation, and from what we've been briefed, there is no evidence to suggest any type of conclusion.
FBI director saying nothing to back up the president's tweets about wiretapping former head of DNI, House Intelligence Committees. I mean, we've had a series of officials. So when does this end for the president? Is it March 28th?
It's not a question of a date. It's a question of where we get answers. You look at someone like Michael Flynn, and you ask the question, how does an American citizen who should be protected by law from having their identity unmasked, how does that happen? Because you got to think about it like this. The FBI and all of the relevant intelligence agencies have access to this document. They can figure out who it was, right? Hold on. So
Who it was?
hold on. In other words,
The wiretapping of the president. That's the
listen,
claim.
I understand that. What I'm getting at is that there's a lot of information that we have come to learn about what happened in terms of surveillance throughout the 2016 election and the transition. And when you look at somebody like Michael Flynn and you realize that while they might have been looking at somebody else at that time, how does somebody's name that's protected by law from being disclosed get put out in the public? Why was it put out in the public? Because the people in the intelligence community would have had access to that information. They could have found out who it was. But yet, you've got to question, why was a name that should have been protected by law from being put out into the public domain put out there? What were the motives behind that? What else do we need to know? Who was behind that kind of unmasking?
So are you saying the president has evidence that we have
No,
yet
no,
to be
I am saying
seen?
that there's a lot more questions that need to get asked about what was being done in terms of surveillance, who was being surveilled, why were they being surveilled, what techniques, why are certain people being sort of, quote, unmasked and having their identity known? What was going on? But there's a lot more questions than answers that need to get asked.
Who does the president trust to provide those
And I think
answers,
we've
if
talked
not
about
the heads of all those agencies?
And we've talked about this ad nauseum, that the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees are looking into this. Today is the first of several hearings that Chairman Nunes intends to call. Senator Burr has already talked about it. There's a ways to go, and I get that you guys want to know the end of the book right now, but we're on the first chapter of this process. Steve.
So Burr and Nunes, he does trust them.
Of course.
To provide those
We've
advanced
put out a
answers.
statement saying so much that we asked them to look into it. So I don't think it should come into any surprise that that's where we have noted multiple times that that's where the president believes the appropriate place in the process and the and for all of these documents to go through.
Thank you. Are you aware of any White House officials that are under investigation by the FBI?
No.
Okay. And you mentioned the hangers-on in the campaign earlier and Carter Page, but there was also a question about Roger Stone. Was he also in that category? Is he someone that the president is still in frequent contact with? Because he's often called an informal advisor to the president
Right.
and a confidant of him.
Mr. Stone is somebody the president has known for a long time. He worked briefly on the campaign, I think, till about August of 2015, from recollection. But they have talked from time to time, but I don't think any time recently. But they had a long relationship going back years where they would provide counsel. And again, I played a role early on in his campaign, but ended that role in August of 2015, and I don't know at all when the last time they even spoke.
Sean, you've been really critical of reports that are based on sources in the past. Today, it seems like the two headlines that we got out of the committee were, one, an official confirmation directly from the FBI and the Justice Department that there is an ongoing criminal investigation into whether associates of the sitting president had contacts with Russia and Russian operatives, and whether there was any coordination between those. And the second headline being that there is an official, you had questioned in the past, previously a couple weeks ago, when there were reports in our paper and others that the FBI director was indicating that there was no support for the president's tweets, you said, well, those are just reports, those are not coming from his mouth, he hasn't said it. Okay, we've now got it from his mouth directly in open testimony that there's no evidence that he has to support the president's tweets. I guess the question is, you know, do those two facts, which are now on the record and not attributed to anonymous sourcing, does that cause this White House any concern? And how come you treat the latter, the one about wiretapping, you want to say that's just in the early stages, but on the former one, you want to sort of come to the conclusion that the investigation is sort of gotten to the point where you don't have to worry about that because that's all said and done and everybody's come to the conclusion on that. So that seems like you're treating both of those pieces of news very differently.
Well, first, I think your headlines are bad. I'm glad to rewrite. I'd be glad to if you guys are looking for some help. I'm
For a job?
Our services are at the New York Times disposal if it comes to writing headlines, and we could probably do a couple things on stories too if we're willing to go there. I think because there's a big difference. One is literally talking. There's a big difference. Everyone keeps conflating that there's an investigation into the 2016 election. Got it. No disagreement there, right? But I think that there's a question about collusion between anybody. And my point has been to say over and over again, to the dismay of every one of you guys, is that when the people who have been briefed by the FBI about collusion between individuals, the answer continues to be no. And at some point, take no for an answer. When these people, both sides of the aisle, Obama appointees, elected Democrats, elected Republicans, say no evidence suggested, at some point, it's not just about me, it's about you. Take no for an answer.
This investigation began in late July, so for a counterintelligence investigation, that's a fairly short period of time.
So you use the word coordination, which to me suggests that you are in fact investigating whether there was coordination between U.S. persons and the Russians. Is it fair for me to assume that we shouldn't simply dismiss the possibility that there was coordination or collusion between the Russian efforts and U.S. persons as an investigatory body?
All I can tell you is what we're investigating, which includes whether there was any coordination between people associated with the Trump campaign and the Russians.